Hello, Earthlings. Welcome to another vegan time tunnel. So as we know, we're putting together an archive of interesting events in the history of the animal movement. And so we had a heavyweight session last week when we looked at Leslie Cross. So this week it's going to be a little bit shorter, I think. Also a little bit more fun, probably as well. Because there's a little bit of a kind of amusing anecdote towards the end of this, really. I will say that don't forget, feel free to comment. Andy is working hard in the background, and he's there ready to put your comments up on the screen, and hopefully I'll see them, but we'll see how it goes. It's an imprecise kind of way of doing this. So let's get rid of that. Okay. And also don't forget, folks, if you're watching live and you're watching on anything other than my YouTube channel, then if you go to my YouTube channel, that's the best place to have the best conversation, because we will be able to see your comment if you comment on Facebook, for example, but you won't be able to see anybody else's comment apart from your own. So that's the difference there. So that's us all set up, I think, for another time tunnel. So welcome along. Right, so this is a direct action in the 1980s, and this is the Northern Animal Liberation League. And the reason I've put 22 flat batteries is the fact that I normally call this the Battery 22. So one of the now actions in 1983 was against a deep litter or deep pit laying unit, and so some people were arrested, myself included, and we ended up being called the Battery 22, so hence the name. But really, we're talking really about the Northern Animal Liberation League, the first of the liberation leagues, really. So we'll come on to a little bit of the history in that sense. Normally, I do some advertisements here for the Talon conspiracy. Let me get rid of my gum. Very unprofessional. The Talon conspiracy, it was an absolutely brilliant archive. Sadly, the Talon conspiracy is down now. And so I've had to be scratching around getting little bits hit from here and there, because it all used to be there. Kind of took it for granted, really, which was a shame or a mistake. So the Talon conspiracy is down now. Their Facebook page is still up, and there's still quite a lot. If you go into their photos, still quite a lot there, but nothing like what was in their website. So I still haven't found out why they're down, but it's a real shame that they are. We'll have to try and kind of get to the bottom of that. In fact, oddly enough, they didn't have a great deal about the now. No one seems to have a great deal about the now, and there's not a lot out there. There's just little dribs and drabs. They had a couple of booklets from the 80s, and that was kind of just about it. This was one of them. As you can see, it's virtually unreadable on the screen. And again, in terms of quality, it's better on the Facebook page anyway for some reason. But this is actually a page which has a report about the Battery 22, but you can't see it, unfortunately. So there you go. We'll move away from that. So Northern Animal Liberation League, then, it was operational by about 1980, fully operational. You could say that it came into kind of being 79, probably. And it was virtually destroyed by 1985 because they got involved in a big trial because of a raid. And their kind of policies kind of changed a little bit, and things went a little bit sour for them. I'm getting quite a lot of material here from this book. here, which is Against All Odds. And it's a really interesting, it's really a pamphlet, really. It's not much of a book, but it's an interesting historical document by J.J. Roberts. Not the actual name, but that doesn't matter. And so, yeah, their downfall was a result of a 400-strong raid on the ICI laboratories. So the ICI had some laboratories in Alderley Edge, which is the north of England, not far from where the NAL was based, really, because they were kind of Manchester-based. And so the ICI, for people who know a little bit of the history of things, that was where the infamous ICI smoking beagles were taken from. So if you remember the ICI beagle scandal, you'll know it was a kind of, the first kind of place that was raided. That was by the ALF, and then the NAL kind of came up a little later. So this is their first raid. This is an account of their first raid. Again, from this, just read out the first paragraph. The Northern Animal Liberation League was the first regional coordinating body for direct action in the country, organizing mass actions against hunts in a way that had never before been envisaged. So I'm going to say a little bit about that in a minute. In 1980, they organized their first, and in retrospect, probably their most successful raid against the now notorious Brabraham Agricultural Research Centre. Over 200 activists staged an occupation and gained entry to the farm units, these kind of experimental farm units, where pigs had holes in their heads and cows with holes in their sides. This is the cannula that people have seen, I'm sure. They were found and photographed. And so that was kind of really new in those days. And then in terms of the two little kind of squares to the right there, that's really interesting. It gives an account of when the NAL were doing a stall in the north of England, and a well-known vivisector ended up passing. And so they challenged him to a public debate there and then on the spot. And apparently a crowd kind of gathered as it proceeded, and they did have to escort him away after a while, because he was arrogantly suggesting that he didn't have to account for his actions to the public, even though it was in their name. And then another part of the NAL philosophy is that bottom part, talking about the fact that the idea was to gain information, but then show it around, because this was a real kind of expose time. There wasn't a lot of footage in these days, and there wasn't a lot of documentation in these days. This is pre-internet, of course, and so getting kind of footage was really kind of important. The NAL were also featured at the end of the Animals film, the regional one in 1988, and I'm going to show you just a little clip from that.
Animal lovers, we respect animals. We respect our neighbours. We don't love our neighbours. We respect them. We respect their right to live.
Okay, that's very short, so I'm going to just play that again, just in case you didn't catch it.
We're not animal lovers. We respect animals. We respect our neighbours. We don't love our neighbours. We respect them. We respect their right to live.
Indeed. Right. So back to the PowerPoint. What the NAL was really about was they insisted on kind of mass militancy. And they argued that the mass part of it was much more effective than individual and small-scale direct action, including hunt saboteurs, as we said. In fact, one of the NALAs, we used to call them NALAs, one of the NALAs used to say to me that it was a lot better to go out against a hunt with, say, 150, 200 people once a month or every 6 weeks, rather than every week or even several times a week, because you could actually shut them down with that amount of people. And so their thing was always about mass actions. What the Talon conspiracy said about the NAL, unfortunately you can't check it out now, but they had a quote saying the NAL had a tendency towards anonymity for the sake of rejecting big egos, which was kind of part of their policy. So not really sure how they would have coped now with, you know, today's idea of celebrity vegans and this kind of stuff, because that, you know, back in the day, none of that really existed. One thing that was often the case was that the ALF and the NAL clashed in terms of strategy. The NAL slogan, as you can see here, so on the screen you've got the NAL mag, and then just to contrast it, you've got the target mag from the Southeast Animal Liberation League, and so they were probably ultimately even more successful than the NAL in the end. But if you see on the NAL one, it says "over the fence when they least expect it," and that was their slogan. Get a lot of people into animal use facilities and do so in the dark, in the daylight. In fact, they were very critical of the ALF, and they kind of classified the ALF as creeping around in the dark at night, and they weren't into that at all. Some of the activists did kind of bridge the gap between the NAL and the ALF, and I was kind of one of those. And it was just then a question of adhering to the policy of the group when you were with one rather than the other. For example, the ALF globally always had some kind of policies which were based on three things. One was rescuing other animals from places of their exploitation. The second was to cause economic damage to the animal user industry. That was often called economic sabotage. And then the third one was that no action should harm any animal, human or non-human alike. And so that was the policy of the ALF. But for the NAL, the big emphasis was getting information about animal use and getting documents or film or photographs. And again, we're talking about pre-internet. And so their policy was to get in, take a lot of people with you and get evidence, but do minimal damage. The ALF was different. They took small groups into places, and they had the attitude that, well, if you've gone to the trouble of getting in, you might as well smash the place up. And so if you got into a laboratory, for example, which would be full of computers, then they would smash them up to make them, you know, not being able to function for several days afterwards. Then the NAL had a different attitude. Another part of the NAL policy was that they thought that by taking a lot of people into some place, this had an educational benefit for the activists as well as the public. So the activists would obviously bring out the material, but in terms of the activists' experience, that was really important. And I can kind of testify to this, because once an activist saw inside these units and you felt it and you smelt it, then you literally never forget it, you know. And that's really kind of really useful in a way, because if you then experience the usual thing from vivisectors or farmers, you know, we've got the best welfare in the world and all that kind of stuff. Once you've actually experienced an animal use facility, you don't forget it, and you kind of don't fall for their guff either, you know. It was very effective, I think. It was really the forerunner for what became open rescue. This is Patty Mark to the right there, who started open rescue, where you would go in almost ALF style, but you wouldn't hide your identity, and in fact you would often kind of give yourself up. And in some senses the idea would be to welcome being through the court system, in the sense then that you could expose the animal use. And quite often the animal use industries didn't want to do a court case, because it would mean then that the details of what they were up to would be reported by the press and everything. So quite often they wouldn't sue the people. It kind of changed after a while. You can only get away with doing that for some period of time, but that was the initial strategy. Meet the Victims was also is a forerunner to that as well. This in fact is a shot of the Irish uh, Meet the Victims event, and I did the press for this one. So and going back to this idea about getting the evidence on the street. So this is a VIP kind of mini poster that we produced. So we was then able to use all the evidence that was gathered on the Meet the Victims action, and then bring it to the Dublin City Centre essentially. And so that's you can see that taken last Saturday. It was as immediate as that. It's the same with the save. You know, one of the VIP banners is based on a save, and in fact, the vegan group now have a second save set of photographs that they show on the street. A little bit of press coverage. Now, I can't read this too well, so I'm going to put it on full screen because I think this is quite interesting from a press point of view. We went to great attempts to make sure that it wasn't the usual kind of press coverage that you normally get about, you know, cruelty and mercy and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm going to put it on full screen, so give me a chance to read it. It said, improving animal welfare. This occupation was not designed to expose animal cruelty on a particular farm or to report a farmer for bad treatment. This action tackles the core of the issue: normalized and unnecessary exploitation of sentient individuals. We believe that all animals, human and non-human, should be equally respected and therefore live free from oppression and exploitation, said spokesperson Andy Anderson. Our aim at this action is to disrupt legalized violence against non-human animals, he added. Another activist, UCD academic Dr. Roger Yates, told the Westmeath Examiner that the farm in Raheny was randomly chosen. It was a random choice. When animal use is widespread, while animal use is widespread in Ireland, the public are often unaware of the details of their exploitation and general use. In fact, many people seem to believe that Ireland is a special place for other animals. This is not the case. Animal use is globalized, and animal use in Ireland simply follows the industry standards, he says. So, as you can see from that, then we really did kind of work hard to make sure that we didn't get the sort of normal kind of press coverage about red tractors and about, you know, welfare standards and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know, that was the kind of big difference. Okay, so going back then to the 1983 raid, it was an action against a deep pit battery unit near Manchester. Again, this is the north of England. So I've got some pictures here. They're not too graphic, so don't worry too much about that. But this is to try and give you some idea about what a deep pit looks like. So the one at the top there is it's so you've got this kind of shape where, you know, the top cages are set back, and then the ones below are kind of set away from them, which means that the feces all drops down into the pit below. So if we can get rid of that banner, Andy, so we can see the bottom bit. Can we get rid of that? Hang on. There. Okay. So that's the kind of drawing of this effect. So those kind of dark squares are the cages, which are again are like this. So that means that the feces will drop down. So that's the kind of idea, which is why it's called a deep pit system, or sometimes a deep litter system. And I always just say that one of the most remarkable and even disturbing images you can get is if you do get into the pit below and look up, you can just see hundreds, if not thousands, of feet. And it is true that the Animals film had a shot of this for the first time ever. So this is a still from the Animals film where you could see that. So this is filmed from the shit pit, if you like, below where the birds are suspended in the air. So you've got to think of it as being on two levels. There's the bird level, and then there's the kind of waist level, if you like. So about 50 activists invade this farm, and some had banners, others had cameras. And so the idea was that the banner demonstration would act as a bit of a decoy for what was going on in terms of getting the material. And so I was one of the ones inside the unit, and the idea was to get as much photography done as possible, and then probably pass on the camera to somebody who could escape over the fields, because the last thing you want to do is take expensive cameras into these places, take lots of shots, and then lose them, because the police always had a habit of oh, we accidentally opened the back of the camera and all the film was ruined, that kind of stuff. So the farmer was obviously on his phone straight away, because it didn't take long for a group of kind of heavies to arrive, other farmers and even people that the Nowell people recognized from the hunts. And they were pretty violent. As soon as they arrived, they piled into the demonstrators and they snatched their banners from them, and then they removed the sticks from them and started to beat the demonstrators with the sticks. And so that ended up being a big part of the subsequent court case. So the police arrived. It was a fairly chaotic scene. Eventually 22 people were arrested and charged with criminal damage. So I was one of those. So a good more than half escaped, some holding chickens as they went, which technically was in breach of Nowell rules, really. One enterprising activist, he ran off with a couple of birds. He got them home and made them comfortable, had a bath and put on a suit, and then returned to the police station where we were being held, and pretended to be a solicitor's clerk so he could get access to the cells, just to kind of make fun of us, really, kind of, ha, you got caught and I didn't, you know, that kind of thing. Of course, as usual, in the cells themselves, we were offered egg sandwiches. You know, the police thought that was a funny joke, of course, and all of those obviously were refused. And then we were eventually bailed, and then it was off to court a little later. And so, in terms of the thumbnail for today's time tunnel, I had a picture of somebody dressed up in a chicken suit, because what we did at the beginning, we mentioned the vivisector and the mock trial, as it were, or the public debate earlier on. But what we had held a mock trial before we went into court that morning, and so we were just outside the courtroom across the way in a little park, and quite a few journalists turned up, and I think we ended up on the midday news as well. So I was the judge in this mock trial. There was a long-term vegan, John Page, who we're still in contact with, and he's lucky enough now to live in a beautiful place in Scotland. And he was the one dressed up as a chicken. And so the charge read out was that he was charged without regard for the law or for good taste, in other words, running around the town with feathers missing, etc., and a floppy comb. He was charged with escaping from a battery unit, which was a terrible thing to do, it was alleged. So I condemned his escape from the unit as an evil act against humanity. And so I sentenced him to be hung upside down and violently killed. So, as I said, the trial was filmed for local TV, and it did make it to the lunchtime edition, as far as I know. So when we took off into court now, so it must have been, I don't know, 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, John was still in his chicken costume, and he didn't want to take it off. And so we were told that the case couldn't really continue until he took it off, because it was almost like contempt of court, you know. So eventually he tried just to take half of it off, and eventually he had to take all of his costume off. But he was still a bit defiant in the sense that he would, when he was asked for his plea, are you guilty or not guilty, he just squawked like a chicken. So he entered his not guilty plea as a squawk. And so I think the clerk of the court said something like, oh, okay, I'll take that as not guilty. And so that's what they did. Okay, so this is a very, very poor, bad picture of the court as I remember it. So just to give you a rundown of what you're looking at, apart from it being quite shoddy artwork. So the MMM to the left there, that's the magistrates. So what it normally is that the main magistrate sits in the middle, and the two juniors sit, either side. The one at the top was a woman, very kind of stiff-looking woman, very kind of Thatcherite-looking, a very kind of prim and proper type of thing. So that's relevant a little bit later. The bench in front of the magistrates is where the clerk of the court sits and records everything. W is the witness box, and then the lines in the middle there are the seats for all the barristers and the solicitors. The P is the press box. The D is the dock where we were, and then P, it's actually PG. It looks like PC, but it's PG. That is the public gallery. So that's the setup. Now, a few of us, me included, were represented by a well-known radical solicitor from Manchester called Rhys Vaughan. He was quite well known for, defending justice activists and stuff. And so he was my solicitor. He was a Welsh guy, which you probably get from the name Rhys Vaughan. He was very slight of build, and he was very flamboyant in terms of his behavior in court. He used to wear a suit with a waistcoat, which he used to tuck his thumbs into, and he would often ask the witness a question, and so you could see the direction, and then he would turn all the way to the public gallery. And he tended to have this thing where he would just say, "Oh, I see," in between every question, and that's the way it kind of worked. And so from an activist point of view, because people said, well, he's not going to do you any favors because the magistrates hate him because of his theatrics and everything. But of course we loved him because he was like almost like taking the mickey out of the proceedings. Yeah. And then the other thing to say before we get on to the Rhys Vaughan is the SH there is Stephen Hurst. And so that's one of the Nallers, one of the activists who decided to defend himself. No, absolutely not. I mean, this would have been before the days, Joanna, of even being able to record the news for ourselves. So no, it would think. Also, we would have been in court when it went out. It would have probably gone out just once. There would have been anybody to record it, even if we had the equipment. So sadly, not. That's lost forever, I'm afraid. So Stephen Hurst decided to defend himself. And then this was really interesting because when you defend yourself, you can ask questions that a solicitor or a barrister cannot really do for legal reasons. And so we were told afterwards by the other team, if you like, it's really useful having somebody defend themselves because they break the rules, essentially. And of course, they get told off, just that you can get away with it. And so that means then that the official barristers and solicitors can kind of build on what they'd said, even if they're not supposed to have said it, if that kind of makes sense. And so apparently it's really quite useful. So the funny thing that I remember, the main thing about the trial, and we were acquitted in the end, was this exchange between Rhys Vaughan and one of the farmers who had turned up and started belting people. And so Rhys said to the guy, did you have a stick? I'm not going to try Rhys Vaughan's accent because I can never do it, and it would be an insult to even try. But did you have a stick? And the guy goes, no. And so Rhys did that thing of turning to the gallery. Oh, I see. And so he said, well, your father, he had a stick, didn't he? And the guy went, well, yeah. And so he turned to the gallery and went, oh, I see. Turned back. Your uncle, he had a stick, didn't he? And the guy goes, yeah. And he goes, oh, I see. So this kind of routine was going. And then eventually Rhys turned to the guy and said, are you sure you didn't have a stick? And the guy said, no, I had an iron bar. Right. And of course, the entire court just collapsed into laughter, including this kind of woman magistrate who was close to, and I just remember her kind of putting her head down and kind of, stifling laughter, because, and then Rhys kind of concluded by saying the only people who admit to being violent are the farmers. So Deb, yeah, did any of the farmers get charged with assault? No, I don't think they did. I think they might have been close to it, but as far as I remember, they didn't. But then, of course, we were the defendants, they were the witnesses. But I mean, yeah, you could say that if the police had been even-handed, but of course we were on their property, so it was kind of civil trespass and all that, and they would have been sympathetic towards the farmers rather than us. But yeah, I mean, technically they could have. Oh, my screen's just gone blank. Hang on, I'll bring that back. Okay, so people, that's about it really. So that's the battery 22, or the flat batteries as we call it. And that's a little bit of a history of the Northern Animal Liberation League. And if you look for this book, I can't remember where it is now, but all right, here we go. Now Thinking on Policy was to inspire the formation of many new non-aligned animal rights groups and spawned the Western, Eastern, Central, Southern, and most importantly, the Southeast Animal Liberation League. So there was quite a lot of liberation leagues which were really, really kind of active at the time, which led, of course, to the police and the state clampdown as usual. Right, people. So thanks for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed that. And we shall be back next week for another time tunnel. Thanks a lot.
Lots of people would say, I would never eat an ape because, they're so like us.
Sure.
And other people say, I'd never eat my pet dog because I know my dog has an intelligence and I like my dog and my dog likes me.
Sure.
But what about the wasp? What about the mosquito?
Right.
Where do you stop in terms of affording respect to other living creatures on the earth?
I think that is a profoundly difficult question. And I always say that wherever you draw the line, draw it with pencil, because you might want to erase it because you find something out that you didn't know before. But
where do you draw the line?
Yeah, where I draw the line is with animals where we have sufficiently good reason to think that they're not only in the world, but aware of the world and aware of what happens to them, and that what happens to them matters to them. And in particular, that they can experience pain and pleasure, fear, and relief. So where that is, I'm not sure exactly, but it certainly is the case that the animals that are raised, commercially raised for our food, cattle, sheep, hogs, those animals, chickens, certainly are above the line wherever any reasonable person would draw it. What you do about mollusk and oysters and so on, I don't know. But I give them the benefit of the doubt because I have no reason to eat.
No.
And were you able to follow a plant-exclusive diet in prison, or was that just impossible at the time?
Yes, in the day you had actually to be an official member of the Vegan Society. So the vegetarian diet was always established already, and in fact it was called a special diet. And a lot of the ordinary cons would switch to a vegetarian diet when they go into prison, even though they weren't vegetarian, on the grounds that it was known to be better than the standard diet.
Wow.
But in terms of veganism, you had to actually produce, the Vegan Society had this little kind of deep red membership card. And we asked the Vegan Society, when people get arrested and put away, can you just send them a card and we'll send you the money afterwards, kind of thing. And they said no to that,
Wow.
which was a real shock. And so we thought, okay, so we just forged their membership card and just sent them to people anyway. and then Ronnie was saying that a lot of people were influenced to kind of go vegan because of him in prison, and so in the end, he always claims that the Vegan Society was a large criminal organization in Britain for a time, because suddenly you got all these people committing these terrible crimes becoming members in order to get the vegan diet, you know.
Wow.
It's all a bit weird. I don't think you have to do that now. I think you just state it now, I think, rather than having to prove it, as it were. In my prison, you used to have to make an application in order to make an application. So everything in prison is slow. People move slow, you slouch around, you know, you walk around slow and all that. And everything is slow. And so to get anything done is almost a nightmare. And it just kind of slows everything down, which in a weird way kind of helps people deal with their time, I suppose.
The term vegan originated in the 1940s, and it's connected with an English person by the name of Donald Watson. And from the very beginning, what was the core of veganism? It was a decision not to participate in the exploitation of others. That's what it means to be vegan ultimately. In its historical, proper sense, it means I am not going to participate in the exploitation of others to the extent I am capable of.
This is like a board game. It's a bit like Monopoly. And the players in market day are okay, so really we're looking at a snip. We're going to try and lift the lid on the title, you know, how do we become animal-loving animal users? Try and lift the lid on that. We can't really delve into it too much, but this is a little snippet then from my research work. And you can see it there on the top there, particularly a chapter called Species Barrier Maintenance. If you'd like to actually read that, the easiest way to get into it is if you Google Roger Yates social construction. Usually that comes up. Obviously, I'm going to be showing you a PowerPoint and just picking out a few texts from that, just a few highlighted things. So if you want to see the full one at the end, if it's intrigued you enough, then if you email me, roger.yates@ucd.ie. UCD is the University College of Dublin, so that's where I'm an occasional lecturer. What we're really doing then with this thing is going into something that's very basic in sociology, which is the processes of socialization. Although it's a basic concept within the discipline, as you can see here, it can get quite complicated. These are the agents of socialization. We'll be sticking really to the bit at the top in the middle there, kind of family socialization. When we talk about socialization in sociology, we tend to split it up into two things. We talk about primary and then secondary. There is a concept called adult socialization, but mainly we talk about primary and secondary. So we're going to be in that kind of basic kind of area. What we really mean, though, because we make some big claims about socialization, is it's the process by which we become members of society, how we become citizens. It's how we learn the norms and values and the attitudes of our society. There is an aspect to it, though, which is the fact that we learn to conform to those norms and values as well. And in fact, sociologically, one interesting thing is that most people are conformists in a sociological sense. We tend to conform to basic ideas of our own society and our own culture as we're born into it. Even people who self-identify as radical, if you, as it were, scratch between the surface, you'll find there's quite a lot of conformity in their basic core views, which they learn as children. The top left there, you'll see that's the secondary socialization, people like McDonald's. These are the corporations. Bottom there on the right, that's gender socialization. And then the one on the left there at the bottom is a very kind of basic traditional idea in sociology, the idea that social institutions are pouring the norms and values of society into the heads of children. And that means, of course, that socialization is a generational thing. Our norms and values of society are transmitted generationally. And then the last thing on this is this slide shows us two things. First, it's seen as a problem if children are not socialized. So you get kind of, as it were, wild kids, unsocialized children. And in fact, the education system is often seen as the mechanism for which society kind of knocks kids into shape if the family have not done it in the first place. And then in terms of socializing agent, then in a conventional sense, doesn't apply to everybody, obviously. In a conventional sense, we're talking about the first job is mum. She is the main socializing agent in a kind of conventional sense. And we are talking about very basic things, how to use a knife and fork and how to go to the toilet, this kind of thing. Human beings, when we're born, we're helpless beings. But we learn pretty quick. And so we have to have these agents of socialization. So what's really going on is this: the transmission of society's norms and values, society's culture, and that is transmitted generationally. Okay, so I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. But in terms of our focus, when I have more time and a different audience, a non-vegan audience, if you like, I would give out pencil and paper, and I would just ask people, without any more cues or clues, will you please draw me a farm? And generally speaking, this is what I get back. It's not as good as this. Usually a line drawing of this kind of thing. The only people who don't draw this are animal advocates. I did a talk at my university in North Wales a few years ago, and there was 2 animal advocates in the audience, and they drew battery cages and sow stalls and slaughter lines. Everyone else drew this. And so there's some kind of common themes that we get. And of course, what people are doing is they're drawing on those early learning books that they experienced as kids. So the themes, and this is the main one, is this is a pretty happy place. And so this is the kind of mind's eye farm for a lot of people in 2 ways. This is either the farm that they know about or the farm that they want to know about, even if they know other things as well. So if you're an animal advocate on the street and you talk about the use of other animals in farming, the chances are people are going to think about this. This is their cultural resource to answer you. This is what they think of in terms of animal farming. So it's a happy place, all free-range beings there. There's no cages. The other animals are said to have homes. They have adventures out in the field, and then they come home and they are there with their family units. That's another main theme. You've got family units, family groups. In fact, it's usually a bit more elaborate than this. Here we've got ducks and ducklings, but normally we've got chickens and chicks and horses and foals, etc., cows and calves, all smiling, all going back to their home after a day of adventures with their family, and everything is kind of hunky-dory. From an animal rights point of view, you don't have this. In either the pictures that people produce or the books from which they are using as a resource, there is no suggestion of slaughterhouse trucks. They're not going to arrive. So this is a concept that we'll come back to a little later on, the issue of kind of end use. There's no suggestion of end use here. You know, it's just the fact that here you have a farm full of other animals. They all have a great time, and that's the end of the story. Okay, so we'll come back to that. Going back to sociology, but I'm actually using some work from a psycholinguistic professor, Stanley Sapon here. But he's looking at the generational transfer of culture and norms and values. And he does it in a general sense, but also looks at how our relationship with other animals, other sentient beings. The important part is the bit that's picked out in white. Now, this is North American culture, and children are taught to be kind to one another, to be kind to animals, to abhor cruelty of any sort, that violence is not the way to resolve conflicts, and the taking of life is wrong. Now, normally, that creates a few kind of smirks in the audience because we talk about North American culture and you think, what? But the interesting part about that and part of my story is that this is the initial thing that the children are taught. And essentially what Sapon is talking about is what happens when a little bit of reality comes in. That's where it becomes interesting. But what we get, according to Sapon, is a kind of package of norms and values. He calls it a syllabus. And of course, again, they're passed on generationally. This is the kind of power. Sociologically, the most powerful things in our lives are the things we don't particularly have to think about. You know, like easygoing oppression, easygoing speciesism, even easygoing racism. If things are like that, unsaid, unspoken about in your society, then they're powerfully within you. It's kind of like we internalize those values. Once people internalize social values, they become part of that person. And that means it's quite hard to shake them then. And of course, we vegans are in the shaking of values business. Okay, so he says that eventually we kind of have to cue our kids into the fact that society is not quite as rosy as we first told them. Some of the values of real society violate the values that we've just spoken about. And in fact, the violation of those values are often celebrated. So in some senses, this is a problem. And certainly psychologically can't be beneficial, Sapon says. And effectively what he says is that we've got a two-tier value system. We have the kind of goodness and light at the beginning, and then we gradually cue our kids in to the reality. Now this is a general thing. It's not just about our relationships with other animals. We also do it in relation to, say, sexual violence and lots of other kind of issues. Parents protect their kids from knowledge. Okay, so we tend to think, well, we'll tell them this, and then when they're old enough to know, we'll tell them that. It's kind of a natural thing to do as parents. We protect our kids in that way, and we also do it in relation to our use of other animals. So this is about the only thing I'm going to read out. It said that adults typically raise children from birth to 5 or 6 years in a kind of fantasy land of ideal behavior on the part of the world's inhabitants. In this land of goodness and mercy, other animals are humanity's friends, and vice versa applies. So this is the kind of vision that we get initially. And when Sapon looked at the publications from which people draw those pictures that I talked about, then he finds the same pattern. There's no kill lines, there's no slaughter. And in fact, generally speaking, in a very overt sense, you don't see in these early learning books other animals being eaten or on the plate in an overt sense of that's what it is. You might see pizza being eaten, or you might see hamburgers, but you don't necessarily understand that you're dealing with a dead body, essentially. So this is Sapon's research question, which is of interest to us, because what indeed does happen when we kind of move from that fantasy land and we start to learn that actually some of our values in society are not so good. What's really going on is that we're moving from being moral patients into being moral agents. Now, this is quite important for us. In the animal rights sense, we are already involved with a lot of animal exploitation before we're moral agents. We're already involved. We're already eating them. We're already wearing them. We're already using the cosmetics and medication. We're already involved. We're already there. And then we become moral agents, and we can think about moral issues. And then you think, right? Some part of what goes on is that when people go vegan, they kind of have to admit that hitherto they've been making moral error upon moral error until then. And then they kind of have to deal with it in a sense. What Sapon is saying, as I suggested, is that there is a reconditioning goes on. Really, we're cueing people in to adult life. And what he says about adult life is it's full of denial. Now, one thing we do know about human beings, there's an extensive literature on this, is that we are very good at denial. Going all the way back to Freud and onwards, we are very good at denial. We know how to deny things. There's lots of cases, some very disturbing cases where people do things and then they deny that they've done it afterwards. Some really kind of disturbing things. We're really good at this. I've got a chapter in my work about denial where it's something that we shouldn't underestimate. It's very important. So this is what goes on. We're transforming other animals from this fantasy people into objects of utility, as Sappan puts it. In other words, we start to cue our kids in that we use other animals in a variety of ways. And so we might do that by just talking about categories. For example, we might use the category pets to talk about a particular type of use. We might then talk about the ones that we eat. We can talk about the ones that we wear. We can use categories like wildlife or vermin. And so we're kind of cueing our kids in to the fact that our relationship with other animals is far more complicated than what was initially kind of taught to us. And in some senses, kind of deal with that and also kind of eat your food. And another general kind of psychoanalytical point is that society is full of denial, which means that in some senses, we do kind of lie to ourselves. So adults lie to themselves. We also lie to other people, and we lie to our kids. From a psychoanalytical point of view, that's actually common, and it's actually understandable. It's a functional thing to do. Being absolutely, totally truthful all the time would be quite a hard thing to do. We often say that knowledge equals power, but there's a very real sense that knowledge also can equal pain. And the animal advocates here who make it their business to kind of give out literature will know about this, because in some senses, if you try to give somebody a leaflet on the street, you're kind of potentially giving them some pain if it's only psychic pain. If you flip it around the other way and you're the recipient and there's an animal advocate coming for you and you go, okay, this person's trying to give me some information. Am I going to welcome this information? Maybe I'm not. Maybe this is not going to be a story that I want to hear much about. Maybe this is something that I would like to stay fairly kind of pushed away. You know, it's a very real thing. Carol Adams talks about it with a fairly famous concept called the absent referent. I don't know if you've heard of the absent referent, but essentially one example of that would be when we go into a restaurant, we don't order a dead body. We order a steak. But by saying steak, that is the socially sanctioned way of ordering a dead body. Okay, that's what's going on. We are ordering a part of a dead body, but we call it a steak. And so there's the actual reference is absent. An example of that, when I started volunteering with the VIP here on my T-shirt, Vegan Information Project in Dublin, we were given permission to do some stalls in Temple Bar, which is a very famous kind of touristy place in Dublin. I'm sure some of you have been there. And our stall was pretty close to a hamburger bar. And they complained to the people who gave us permission in the first place. And we said, but we don't have any graphic photographs on the stall, which is true. We don't. But we were missing the point because it doesn't need graphic photographs. What was going on is that they're eating their hamburgers and looking over at pictures of farmed animals. And it's making the connection again. It's bringing back the absent referent. The thing that they have scrupulously and very carefully pushed away, the animal part of their hamburger, is being brought back into their consciousness. And we do know that vegans, just being in a room sometimes is uncomfortable. Because if people know you're a vegan, you bring back, by your very presence, the absent referent. You're bringing back the issue that people have very carefully pushed away, that people are in denial of. So if people react to you in that negative way, these are the reasons why. These are the reasons why they're not comfortable about you being there. You don't have to say anything. Just you being there is enough. If they know you're a vegan, then it can be a problem. So people don't want to know necessarily. People say all the time, I don't want to know. Don't tell me. You've probably seen this in your family or whatever. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. It'll spoil my dinner. Very, very common thing. So what is it better to know? Because in the literature, it's interesting. There are other things to do with knowledge than know it. say that again. There are other things to do with knowledge than know it. We cannot know things. And there's a couple of ways that works. We can actually physically not know, or we can kind of know a little bit and then say, okay, I know about that now, I'll move on. Now, don't tell me about the third world starving, developing countries, and food security. I know all that. You know, I got the Live Aid DVD. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I'll move on. So it's a kind of shallow understanding. So you don't really fully know. So what's better to know? We're back to the books. This is one of the books that I looked at in my research, Tales from Mud Puddle Farm. As you can see here, there's an entire community of other animals and 2 human animals, the farmers, Farmer Rafferty. What's going on in this book is a really cozy social contract, a reciprocal kind of thing going on. And it's summed up by that bottom bit there, if you can see it. You look after me, and I'll look after you. That's what the farmer says to the other animals. You look after me, and I'll look after you. How that plays out in the story is really fascinating. What you've got is there are free-range hens on this farm, and they lay their eggs for the farmer. It's almost like this is the rent they pay. And, you know, farmers will actually say this to us. You know, they don't do it to reproduce their species. They don't do it for themselves. They don't do it just because it's biological. They do it for the farmer. And in particular, there are 2 cows on the farm, and they let their milk down for him. This is interesting, as though they could keep it up as one thing. But what's interesting on this level, there are no calves on this farm, just adult cows who provide milk for the farmer. There's no issue about pregnancy. There is no tapping into mammalian biology. We might know this as vegans. Isn't it strange that there are so many people out there in society? They don't seem to know that they're mammals and what that means, including women. They don't know what it means to be a mammal. And so they say that cows just give milk. They give milk for life. But they know that they couldn't do that. You know, they would dry up, you know. But they don't transfer that to other mammals. And part of that is the fact we're in denial again. We don't self-identify as animals. If people call you an animal in the street, they're insulting you, right? We don't self-identify as mammals, and we certainly don't self-identify as apes, do we? Again, if somebody called you an ape, now if somebody called me an ape, I should say, yeah, I know. But we don't. We see it as an insult, right? So that's what's going on in this situation. Very cozy social contract where the other animals work along with the farmer. Now, just to bring this back, this issue came back into my consciousness a few years after the research in a kind of weird and unusual place. And it was this. Came back as a McDonald's Happy Meal. And in fact, there's a YouTube of the illustrator talking about this. And he's kind of going, wow, you know, I did the illustrations for this book. And now McDonald's have done it on the Happy Meal. You know, how fab is that, as it were? But I was thinking, wow, there's a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there? You know, somebody draws pictures of happy animals, and now there's bits and pieces of animals in this box. But in fact, it is actually quite easy to think about. And the real key to it is the word happy. So we've got other animals on happy farms, and what better to perpetuate this myth than that they find themselves in a happy meal. So everything is happy right from birth to slaughter, which is never mentioned in the first place. So it's not particularly difficult to think that these other animals find themselves on the cover of a McDonald's Happy Meal. It's not as shocking as we might initially think. Okay, this is some other, just to finish off really, some other publications that I looked at. Some of the very basic ones are really kind of getting the kids, you know what they do, you get the kids to, what do animals say? You know, what does a cow say? What does a dog say? That kind of thing. However, the narrative of these books can get quite complicated fairly quickly. The one in the middle there, Nubbins and the Tractor, that's a fascinating book. It's about animal property. It's about the transfer of animal property from one human being to another. And that taps into the fact that culturally, other animals are things. In law, there are two categories, persons and things. They are things. They are items of property. We can kill our animal property so long as we don't cause unnecessary suffering, which is a cornerstone of animal welfare. We can kill our pets. We can kill our animal companions. We can do it ourselves so long as we don't cause unnecessary suffering. Normally what we do is take them down to the vet once we're fed up of our living ornaments. So what happens in the story is that the farmer buys a tractor. This makes Nubbins the horse redundant. And so Nubbins is going to be sold. And the son doesn't like that. And so he says to his dad, can you transfer the ownership of Nubbins to me? Which he does. And then the tractor breaks down. And so that means that suddenly Nubbins is needed again to work on the farm. And the end of the story is you've got the son, now the animal owner, and the owned, happy as Larry, going back to work on the farm. You know, so there is actually quite an interesting narrative going on there. The Four Ways Farm is an entire community of other animals. Humans don't seem to appear there at all, as though they just live there and have their adventures, etc. When we get into the teenage market, we're back into categories now. This is Animals and You. It's kind of like a poppy kind of magazine. It's aimed at teenage girls or young women. And they're really into the categories game. Most of it is about pets. Most of it is about the other animals that are categorized as pets. Free living beings get a mention too. And actually, farmed animals do get a mention, but only as food. So what you would get, say, there's a Christmas edition, and the question there is, what should we have for Christmas lunch? And the answer is, well, we'll have the traditional turkey and all the trimmings. So the image there that you get is of the child and the pet enjoying the unnamed farm animal. Now, again, playing with the categories that we've come to understand. Some of them we use as pets. Some of them we use as food. Some of them we use to wear. And finally, we've got Market Day. This is like a board game. It's a bit like Monopoly. And the players in Market Day are farmers, and they rush around the board, having all kinds of adventures, and they win. You know, each farmer is a winner once their farm is full of other animals. There's no questioning issue about why would they do that? What are they going to do with it? So there's no end game again. It's as though culturally, well, we're dealing with farmers here. What do farmers do? They fill their farms with other animals. That's what they do. So this is what this game is all about. Quite an interesting kind of issue in the sense that end use, again, culturally, is absent. You know, why spoil the game by getting them to take them to the slaughterhouse? And so we're trying to lift the lid on this question then. How do we end up in this state? And the sociological answer is that we're born into a culture in which this is the norm. We're born into the culture where it's said to us that you can love animals and you can eat them. You can love animals and you can use them. You can love animals and they can be used in vivisection laboratories, etc. You can even love them and hunt them. Okay? This is a cultural thing. And the kind of categories help because we know that there are some we use as pets. The ones who are designated as pets, their use is to be petted and to be loved. The ones designated as food, their use is to be eaten. Which is why sometimes in some horrible, filthy, disgusting foreign land, some people make categorical errors, don't they? And they start frying and boiling up the cats and the dogs. And all the people in Britain and elsewhere, they go rather upset about that because they're doing it to the wrong types. That's the problem there. And so you get all this racist stuff coming out. You know, the damn Chinese and the damn Japanese and everything else, because they are using other animals which our culture says is wrong. Really, they're just using them. I mean, in Japan, for example, foxes are seen as sacred. We hunt them, you know. So that kind of lifts the lid on this question. And it shows that we are born into a deeply speciesist society. That is our job. As animal advocates, as vegans, we have to challenge cultural speciesism. If we don't, we'll never win. We can't win so long as the culture of our society is deeply speciesist. It's not about individual butchers or vivisectors, it's about the culture. We have to find a way of shifting the culture to make it not acceptable anymore to teach our kids that they can be animal-loving, animal users.